Well, thanks for coming in, man. I appreciate that.
Not at all. My pleasure. Great to be here, Jordan.
Coming in means something different when you're a spy, I guess. I don't know.
From the cold.
Yeah, coming in from the cold.
Into this lovely warm embrace.
That's right.
Jordan Harbinger podcast.
That's right. That's right. So before we jump into all the thinking like a spy, what's this place with all the pythons that you wrap around your neck?
In Ouida.
Where's this?
It's in Benin,
okay.
which is on the. It's in West Africa.
Okay.
South coast of Benin, and it's the centre of voodoo, which people often mistake as hoodoo, which is.
I don't even know what hoodoo is. That's a real thing?
Hoodoo's the, in inverted commas, black magic concept, whereas voodoo is a legitimate religion, followed by a lot of people in that part of West Africa.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And they worship the python. And one of the consequences of worshipping the python is you're not allowed to harm it. You're not allowed to go against its wishes. And they have a temple there, and in Ouida, which I visited on a project some time ago. And I foolishly decided to go to the temple and allow them to put one of the many, many pythons that live there around my neck, without realising that were it to strike or to do whatever pythons do, which is harmful, nobody would intervene. Because
they're not going to help you.
They would not help me.
It's God's will or whatever.
Absolutely, the pythons will. But fortunately, we seem to be going okay.
So
the snake.
How many people die of python bites then? It must be a lot.
I have no idea. That's something I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, it's probably a statistic that they don't love to share.
They're not going to advertise it. But I petted alligators or crocodiles rather in Gambia. So there's something about travelling to West Africa which obviously makes me take leave of my senses and decide that it's okay to pet very dangerous animals.
Yeah, it must be the jet lag. I don't know, man. That seems crazy to me because they put the python around your neck and you go, oh, so how do you defang these things and devenom them? And then they don't. Right. The answer is they don't.
Touch them. No. I mean, it's the veneration of the python in that part of the world is so great that each residential property has a python hole.
Like
so
a doggy,
the pythons can come and go.
So it's a doggy door for snakes?
Absolutely.
No thanks.
They can slither at night, at any time, day or night, and you're not meant to evacuate them should they come into your living area.
And so you could just wake up with a python next to you?
Absolutely. I think, in fact, adherents of voodoo would consider that very good luck. Consider that a good sign.
At what point doesn't it become bad luck when one kills a member of your family? I mean, that's not good luck.
I'm not going to question their beliefs, but it's not something I think I could subscribe to. I have to say, luckily I was staying in a hotel. And
no python holes.
Not on the ground floor, no python hole.
Oh, man.
But I did have the python around my neck, and according to a friend of mine, it made a difference later on that same visit when I was protected from a fetish. But
what's a
fetish story?
A fetish in American English means something, I think, slightly different.
It can.
It's like a foot fetish, a little BDSM. What is a fetish?
A fetish is it's almost like a sacrifice to the gods, as I understand it. It's usually a pile of bones or blood or broken eggs, which is put on the ground near to where tragedy has struck. And my understanding is that if somebody, for instance, is killed tragically in a road accident, a fetish is built nearby where they're buried, because it's believed that a devil exists within their body. And the first person to step over that fetish, inadvertently, invites the devil or the demon from the deceased's body into his own.
So do we all have devils, or is it just people who died tragically?
I think it's only those who died tragically.
I see. So the reason they died tragically is because there's a devil in their body and that devil's looking for a new victim. Something like that?
Or the devil has entered them to cause a tragedy, something like that, or a demon. I'm certainly not an expert on this, but when I was, after having had the python around my neck, I was then on a walk down the Rue des Esclaves, which is the route that the slaves were made to walk before being dispatched on slave ships to the Americas. And I got to this point where I was with a colleague, and we got to a crossroads, and there was a cemetery Western Cemetery in one corner. My friend went in to look at some of the gravestones, and I tried to walk in. I'm not kidding about this. I tried to walk in into the cemetery, but I felt a force, a pressure, like a hand pressing against my chest, pushing me back. And of course, my colleague was laughing at me, believing that I was japing about. But I tried again and again. I felt like I was pushed back. And then later, a friend of mine from neighbouring Nigeria, who knows about these things, said to me, was there a fetish on the ground, and was it as a crossroads? And both of those things were true. And he said, and I bet you'd had the python around your neck, hadn't you, that morning? I said, Fidelis, how did you know that?
Yeah, he's pulling your leg.
Well, he wouldn't have known. But this is one of the interesting things I write about in the book, because he wouldn't have known about the sequence of events, because I was engaging with him immediately on return. And it really led me to think about, how do we tell when somebody's pulling your leg? How do we tell when somebody's attempting to deceive you? Fidelis is a very honourable man, full of integrity, very devout Christian, and I have no reason to disbelieve him. And but I was looking for signs that he was ragging me, if that's a particularly British phrase, ragging.
It is, yeah, but I think we can
pulling your leg, and I don't think he was. I think these teachings are well known across that part of West Africa.
Huh? Do you believe in supernatural types of stuff?
I don't. I believe that we are nowhere near understanding what is out there, if you like. That's perhaps not the most scientific way of putting it, but we can only know our knowledge is bound by the boundaries of our knowledge, isn't it? Which sounds like an obvious thing to say. So I think it's always very surprising when people deny the possibility that there are things happening which we don't understand. I mean, if you think about it, 100 years ago, the idea that we would be sitting here with phones a few feet away from us, capable of reaching somebody through the atmosphere on the other side of the world in real time, they'd have said, no, that's not possible. It's just simply not possible. And so I'm sure there are things that we would say are not possible scientifically, but are. And there's a lot we don't understand. I'm sure of that.
And for those I'm usually very not woo-woo. So for people who are like, what happened to Jordan? What's going on here? The rest of the episode is not going to be like this. I just thought that was an interesting story with the pythons.
Talking about spooks to a certain extent.
Yeah. Let's shift to a different kind of spooks. Yeah, exactly. Give me a brief overview, a very brief overview of your career. Where did you start, and how does one become a spy, so to speak?
Well, I'll skip the early part of my life and go straight to, I was fortunate enough to get to Oxford University, which is always a great start. And that gave me a springboard to go into the city financial sector in a venerable institution, which was subsequently recently taken over by JP Morgan. And from that was a springboard to work on Japanese stocks and shares, in a subsequent job, which gave me a yen for travel. So I applied to work in.
Did you say yen for travel or yearn for travel?
A yen.
Oh, that's a great. That's a great pun.
Forgive the pun.
Yeah.
So I applied for government service overseas, and without going into the exact details about where I ended up, that was like my entry into the world of broadly intelligence, security, and diplomacy. And I was lucky to be posted in a number of places in Africa with that overseas agency. And from there, I went to work for a gentleman called Tim Spicer, who had set up a private security company which had a private intelligence arm. They did a lot of work in Iraq, post the invasion of Iraq, providing security for the reconstruction teams there. And I was asked by Tim to become his head of Africa. I did that for 4 or 5 years, and then I went to set up my own company called Africa Integrity, which specialized in Africa intelligence to support ethical engagement, very specifically. So it's many years of experience in private and public sector.
And you can't say which agency that you worked for? Is that allowed? Or
not specifically, no.
Got it, okay. It's something that people just have to sort of guess. I think shouldn't put in the show open.
It's one of those things which there are very strict legal constraints.
I see.
So really, as far as I should go, is to say that I worked in foreign affairs for a British agency.
Wow. Okay. They try and leave that nice and vague.
They do indeed.
suppose that makes sense because spies. It seems like such a
secret, aren't we?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. Is it's meant to be a secret, and you have to convince other people, depending on what line of work you're in. You have to convince other people to betray their country, and the consequences for that are pretty high. I mean, I'm thinking about Robert Hanssen, who went and betrayed the United States and gave away all these counterintelligence secrets. I assume somebody like that, who's high placed in the FBI counterintelligence and was responsible for looking for moles and turned out to be a mole, we're probably still recovering from that damage.
Absolutely. And I believe Hansen died recently in prison.
Yeah.
So he gave up the rest of his life in the cause of becoming a traitor.
Yeah.
And that's the extraordinary thing, because that's what spies do. They travel abroad and persuade people to betray their countries at the risk of imprisonment, if not torture, and potentially in certain countries execution. And so we see with the likes of Hansen that he gave up his freedom. We see with the likes of Burgess, Philby and McLean that they gave up their reputations, in some cases their freedom, their ability to remain in the country. But people do it, and they do it for, when I talk about spies, I really mean intelligence officers, the person going to recruit those individuals to become traitors, if you like. And they do it for those spies because the latter are trained in a set of skills, which is nothing we talk about it beyond the realms of what we understand. All of these skills are well within the realms of what we understand. Everybody has access to these skills. Everybody can develop these skills. Everybody can train themselves, and everybody can perfect them to do broadly what spies do, which is persuade other people to do what they want. I mean, of course, in the case of the spies, it's an extraordinary achievement, and it's an amazing thing to be doing. But there's nothing to stop a civilian, anybody, anywhere in the world, from using that same set of skills to good and effective ethical ends. And the whole difference is spies do it with intent, and they do it with purpose. And if you can learn to take those sets of skills and turn them intentfully and with purpose to particular goals, you will make a big difference in the progress of your life, personally and professionally.
So do agencies that recruit people to become spies or foreign intelligence officers, whatever, do they recruit people who already have these skills, or do they recruit people that they just think they can train these skills to?
That's the billion-dollar question. It's inevitably the case that some people will have them more innate, and will have developed them more consciously, perhaps, over the course of their life. But actually, those kinds of characters are quite rare. So I think, as in so many cases, what the agencies are looking for is potential. And it's a recognition, not so much that somebody knows how to target, use cover, use cultivation, use techniques of influence, but somebody has the hunger and the personal capability to learn all of that. That's I think, what the major difference. Because we know there are some people who perhaps are a little bit more closed-minded about things, and about their own capabilities. And the services are looking for those people who are open-minded and ready to experiment, ready to take risk.
It makes sense. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this that's not rude, but I've met a lot of intelligence officers from various agencies, various countries. Many of them are very unimpressive people in many ways. And I if you're listening to this, you're watching this, I'm not talking about you, right? But I meet these people who work for French foreign intelligence, or they're retired, because otherwise I wouldn't know, German, US, UK, and I just think, this guy, because in their defense, of course, they would say, well, I'm not trying to recruit you, but it's like, if you really have to turn it on all the time in order for me to think you're not someone who has their head stuck in their butt, that's not a good sign. Because if you don't know me and you're thinking, I don't need to be nice to this person, I don't need to worry about this person, I don't need to connect with this person, well, you don't really know that. And then if you turn it on later, it seems so stinking disingenuous. So I would be more drawn to the person who is friendly, outgoing, connects everyone, even if they don't think that I can help them with anything.
I mean, bingo. I agree. I couldn't agree more with you about that. And I'll tackle that in two parts. The first part about how unimpressive some people in the profession are, and I think that's absolutely true. They're often, they present very unexpectedly. I mean, I've had people say to me that I look like a librarian or I look like an accountant. Well, I think that's probably rude to librarians and accountants, in all honesty. And one might say, well, okay, job done. It's meant to be a secret.
Sure.
But that's a cheap answer. And the reality is that I think there is a breed of officer, trained intelligence officers, who can be a bit disingenuous and do have to turn it on, and it isn't entirely natural for them. Now, whether or not you would notice the switch on that's a different question. But it sounds to me if you've met somebody who's fully retired from the industry, from the profession, then they're not likely to have to manage that segue much more.
It's true.
Carefully.
The reason that I kind of brought this up, I've spent unfortunately, too much time in Hollywood, right? And when you meet an actor like George Clooney, for example, he's so charming all the time. David Duchovny, really cool guy, pretty cool guy all the time. Because if you can act like a really charming, cool guy that everyone loves, why on earth would you turn that off? Unless you'd leave it on almost all the time. So if your job is to connect and network with people and get them to like you, why are you an ignorant stick in the mud until you're on the clock? That part doesn't make sense to me. I don't turn my personality on and off depending on whether or not these cameras are rolling. I'm pretty much the same guy all the time. And so if I have to become myself in front of other people for this show, my wife told me this. She goes, I always wondered if you're going to be like the same. And I used to hear this all the time. Oh, wow, you're like the same person that I hear on the podcast. There's really no difference. That is a much more powerful, in my opinion, impression of someone than somebody who goes, oh, crap, I need something from him. Now it's time for me to smile and act gregarious and connect and see what I can do for them. That to me immediately turns me off when I see people do that. And I can't be the only one who feels that way.
I get what you're saying, because the most important thing which you project very clearly is authenticity. The Jordan I'm sitting talking to here is the Jordan I was talking to 10 minutes ago outside the studio.
Right.
That's fairly clear. And I think what's interesting about actors, and I've had the good fortune to work with a number of actors, most recently on the Slow Horses production, for instance. And what's interesting about actors is, even though their whole job is about pretending to be people they're not, they're actually as authentic off the screen as they are on the screen, and vice versa. And I find that very, very interesting. It's the same point you're making.
Right, they're playing themselves at a certain point, right? They might just not be the serial killer version that they're playing. And
I think that's right.
Yeah.
The difference maybe with intelligence officers is this, that you mentioned spending a lot of time in Hollywood, and there's a Hollywood view, there's a Hollywood image of what is the intelligence officer like. Right. It's the Bonds and it's the Bournes, and I think that's really ingrained in people's psyche. It's not necessarily the case that a spy has to switch on and become charismatic to engage with you. I mean, I like to think about very different, what I call spy styles. And a few of the spy styles that I would point to, for instance, are at one end, the exciter. And that is the classic spy type, the person that you can look at and you say, yeah, that I would follow that person. They're clearly a leader. Perhaps more sort of special forces than civilian intelligence, maybe. The Bonds and the Bournes. But there's also the validator at the other end of the spectrum. And the validator can be quite introverted. They can be quite shy. They can be quite non-flamboyant. They fade into the foreground. But when they engage very meaningfully, and they connect very strongly with the people that they need to engage with. Now, I completely agree with you that if there are cases where that's being done purely for professional reasons, it leaves me feeling as uncomfortable as it leaves you feeling uncomfortable. And I think the best spies bring something of a real, genuine connection when they're building those relationships.
It seems like that's the only way that this is really going to work. Because if I'm going to convince you to betray your country, and if you get caught, your whole family gets executed. But if you do it right, you get a blue passport and you get to live in New York. The stakes are pretty high. So am I going to trust the person who seems to only have a rudimentary understanding of world affairs that they got from watching TV news in America? Or am I going to, and the person who seems to, maybe they're answering my calls when they're on the clock and when they're not, sorry. Am I going to trust that person, or am I going to trust the person that feels like they're actually my friend and not just being paid to act like my friend for 3 hours a day?
Yeah. Are you going to trust a person who's stupid enough to put a python around his neck, for instance? That sort of question.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that we are all, my belief is we're all capable of reading people pretty acutely, and we do it all the time. We do it from the moment we're born, basically. We teach ourselves to switch off often, but we all know when somebody's being inauthentic. We just know it.
Yeah, it's very, and unless you have some sort of disability where you can't pick up on these things, there are for those folks, you are doing this automatically.
Absolutely. Even if you can't say why, you know that person who's in the party looking over the shoulder for the next most interesting person to go on and talk to. You want to avoid them. And they may be flamboyant, they may be charismatic, they may be larger than life, but you don't feel right about them. So of course there has to be a personal connection. Because if you're going to take that risk, right at the basis of this is trust. You've got to trust that person that they're going to protect your identity, they're going to protect their dealings with you, they're going to look after you if something goes wrong to the extent that they can. You have to trust that they are giving something back to you. And that's not just, of course, there may be material considerations, financial considerations, that undoubtedly, but actually part of what is given back quite often in those relationships is an emotional connection. And that has to be genuine. I don't think anybody really can do it without being genuine. This is the
I think that's
really serious paradox at the center of espionage. You have to be an authentic person to do it well. And if you're not, you're soon caught out.
Right. But also lie about who you are.
But also, when necessary, be obfuscate a bit about your precise identity. Indeed. And yes, it's a huge paradox, isn't it? You can imagine that moment of unmasking.
Yes.
When you say, well, okay, you've been talking to me as under insert cover. But I've got something to tell you. Actually, I work for the CIA, or I work for the Mossad, or I work for the IRGC, or whatever it is. And by the way, having just admitted that I've been lying to you for the past 3 years, I'm now going to ask you to risk your life.
Biggest risk of your life. Yeah.
By giving me secret intelligence. How about it?
Yeah, it's a tough sell.
It's a tough sell, isn't it? So unless you've got a genuine, authentic connection already, I think it's an impossible sell. And that sums it all up. It is all this. I've always described it as being about three things. It's being about having self-awareness, others' awareness, and situational awareness. And if you can't combine those three things effectively, you won't ever be a good spy.
Yeah, I think that actually sheds some light on things. So a lot of the people that I've met from these intelligence agencies, I don't know about their level of self-awareness. It's hard to pinpoint that because I'm not them. But the level of other awareness, well, they'll say something to me in a conversation where they're like, I know you're da-da-da-da. And I'm like, you're just wildly way off. And it's so bad that I don't even...
like you've had some bad experiences.
Yeah, I just remember thinking like, oh my God, this is who we have working on Iran? We're... definitely going to have to rely on Israel to tackle this one or whatever, right? Because I'm just thinking like, why are we, this is the person we're sending to Oman to deal with this? Like, this is not good.
I hear where you're coming from. And it's like any organization, isn't it? Every intelligence service, every counter-espionage agency has to deal with the same thing, which is a variety of skill sets, a variety of talents, and so there are going to be some people who aren't very good at it.
I do wonder if this is going to come out wrong no matter how I do it, so I'm going to do it and say present company excluded. I do wonder if the people who go to intelligence agencies and then write books, if they're disproportionately the least qualified people in the agency. Again, present company excluded, because I see these people who sort of seek fame from being an intelligence agent, and I'm like, so you were the guy that everyone was relying on in Sierra Leone? That's terrifying. But maybe the person who was really doing the real work is like, still working there. I don't know.
I'd take it on the chin if I was able to say to you that I was making my public life on the back of my private, my secret life. But as we've already established, we're not saying that. So, but I will tackle the point head on. I think, and I think you're absolutely right. I think some people who seek to build a public life based on experiences of espionage and try to sell the idea that they're going to sit there and exchange secrets with you are not suited to the world. And that's why I'm always clear, I would never reveal a secret. I'm never going to say anything or do anything that would put somebody's life in danger.
Right.
I'm not going to talk about techniques. I'm not going to talk about personalities. I'm not going to talk about names. I'm not going to talk about places. And in my book, for instance, every story I tell is drawn from private sector.
The private sector stuff, yeah. That's good to clarify, because we're going to mention places, but they weren't places you were working with.
Yeah, these are all private sector experiences. Yeah. And I think that's really important, this idea, because I've had several conversations with producers about this, and I made a TV series back in 2016 called Spies. The idea was we take 16 members of the public, find out if they have what it takes to be a spy. It was quite fun.
Should have signed up.
Reality TV type of thing. And it was great fun, but it was never very serious. I mean, it couldn't possibly be serious. We weren't really trying to replicate the way in which spies are trained.
You can't show the trait craft anyway.
And the other point I always make to producers on this, whether it's in the fictional world or the factual entertainment world, is the problem with spying is it's non-visual. It's like if you as a former spy step into the light, like an old negative, you will fade in the light. So you can't. It's literally paradoxically impossible to make an offering, a public offering, about revealing secrets. Do you see what I mean? Because the bit that you can talk about is the bit that everybody can talk about, and that's a paradox. And this is the whole thing of the intelligence services and spying more generally is how paradoxical it is. And we've touched on probably 3 or 4 different paradoxes within 15 minutes of sitting down to talk, and I think that's amazing. What I'm trying to do is something different, which is actually just say, look, hang on a minute, all of this stuff is the important stuff from the point of view of self-improvement or getting on in the world is already out there. And all I'm asking people to do, all I'm inviting people to do is think about how they apply a set of skills that are already publicly available. It's an exercise in democratization, if you like.
Yeah, I like it. I've read the book, as you may be able to tell from some of the questions I'm asking you, but I read the book and I like that you illustrate the points with stories, but I also like that you're very detailed, because a lot of this stuff tends to be like 10,000 foot or 30,000 foot overview of something, like develop rapport. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, how'd you do that?
Colon what? What do I do now? And there's plans in there that you can, here's how I would do a, I'm going to use the word dossier, that's not the word you use, but like a file on somebody. So when I meet them, I have a plan. That's really useful. And I do that stuff. I mean, this is essentially what I'm looking at when I'm talking to you right now. It's probably very similar to what you would use or have in your head when you're meeting a contact. It might not be a PDF, but it might be similar.
Really interesting thing you just said there, Jordan, that you've read the book. Right. You'd be surprised how many interviews I've had with people who clearly haven't read the book.
It's actually the norm. And people always go, oh, gosh, you're so talented at interview. No, I just literally do the most basic level of homework on the guest, and it's already cleared the bar in the 99th percentile.
And here we are connecting, and we're off able to talk about things which wouldn't.
Sure.
In many other encounters, I'd still be stuck in the weeds of, so what happened when you were 12 years old?
Right. We're going to go back there just for funsies.
But I think the point I'm making is that we're already able to connect at a very different level of discussion about the world and about people, because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about, interpersonal connectivity, because you've done your homework. And that's actually essentially all I'm saying. Don't go around breaking GDPR or equivalent privacy laws and what have you. And obviously be very careful about how you how you keep data on people, but
I'm from the United States. We have no laws surrounding it. If we have privacy laws, I never heard about them.
It was in the European Union, and by extension Britain, they're quite strict. But
I know
it's more to do with what organisations do. I mean, essentially, what I'm talking about is a hypersonic version of just making a note of when somebody's birthday is. And being aware of what they're interested in and making an effort to connect with them when something of interest to them comes along. In other words, just not being a self-obsessed a-hole.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go. There's a cultural difference.
Put people's birthdays in your calendar. Set the alarm for 1 or 2 days before, so you're not wishing them happy birthday only on the day because that's what everyone else is doing. And then you put a little list of things you know about them in that calendar entry. Like, hey, man, you still playing pickleball? Happy birthday. It's on Thursday, isn't it? That is such a huge...
Absolutely.
I've used that to keep in touch with hundreds or maybe even 1,000 plus people over the course of the year.
And just remember, what are their kids' name? What's their husband's name?
They must be 5 and 7 years old now.
How are they doing?
Did you ever take them to Disneyland? Yeah, I can't believe you remember this. Well, it is in my text thread from last year. So, all right, that aside, tell me, you had a nurse from Iran when you had an accident as a kid. Can we talk about that? Because it seems like you learned quite a bit from her about alliances, which I think might have informed your work later in life.
Most definitely. I mean, I think probably Maya, careful how I put this, because there's so many people, it runs the risk of offending, not least my family. Family and close friends aside, I think Maya was probably the person who made the most significant difference to my life. In fact, I've probably not a day goes by that I don't do something which has as its wellspring the discussions I had with her when I was 12. And just for the benefit of your listeners, viewers, I ended up meeting her because when I was 11, my older sister took her own life, and this cast me into a very, very severe period of emotional turmoil. I won't seek to put a label on it, and I don't think anybody would ask me to. I think it's fairly clear that an 11-year-old losing his sister to suicide is going to be quite traumatized by it. And about a year later, in the midst of my trauma, I didn't used to be able to face going to school because I was being bullied about that event the year before. And one morning I got the bright idea of being able to avoid going to school by walking in front of a moving car. Now, I can't say that I was intending to kill myself, but I was certainly intending to get out of going to school. I think we'd probably now call it a cry for help. And as a result, I ended up in hospital in a fairly serious state, which required quite a number of medical procedures, operations, surgical interventions, and had the good fortune to meet some incredible staff. Our NHS staff are almost universally fantastic, I have to say. But I met one in particular, Maya, who was not very much older than I was. She can't be more than 18 or 19. And she had fled with her mother as recently as 1979. Now, we're talking about 1982 when I was in hospital. And in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution in Iran, and a number of people were arrested as counter-revolutionaries, and her father was one of those. He was a medical doctor. She never saw him again, as far as I'm aware. Has no idea what became of him. She fled with her mum, ended up in Birmingham, which is roughly in the middle of the UK, where I'd been born and brought up, and sought to become a nurse because she wanted to honour her father's memory by going into the medical field. But she failed her exams the first time round because she
didn't speak English.
Essentially.
That'll do it.
It's an impediment. And then had the bright, I think, simply fabulous idea of asking one of her teachers to get in contact with universities where they studied Farsi, or they offered Farsi. And through that, she met a young student called Dan, Israeli by background as it happens. And Dan and she would meet every day over the course of a summer, and they would have 2 hours of conversation, 1 hour in English, 1 hour in Farsi, so that they would improve each other's grasp of the language.
Dan works for the Mossad now, probably. Now that he's fluent in Farsi. Yeah.
Yeah. By the end of that period, she was able to take her exams again, and again, didn't do as well as she should have done. And then Dan's father stepped in. Dan's father was involved in the jewellery quarter in Birmingham, reasonably well-to-do business person. And he said, look, if you continue working with my son, help him through university, I will pay for you to go back to school and do another, to retake over the course of a year. Because at that point, she was essentially terrified that she was going to have to follow her mother's footsteps and become a cleaner. Nothing wrong with being a cleaner, but she wanted badly to honour her father's memory. And so Dan's father was as good as his word, and a year later she retook her exams, passed them, and then got a place as a state-enrolled nurse. And that's where a student nurse to become a state-enrolled nurse. And I met her, I think, in the first year of that programme. And she said to me one day, Kuchulu, which I understand means little one, dear one. She always called me that. She said, allies are the most important thing in life, and always remember that. And I always have. I mean, it just made such a profound difference to the way I thought about the world. You know, of course, I believe in the importance of education. I think we should always be on a lifelong quest to learn. But if you don't have allies on your side, it doesn't really matter how accomplished you are intellectually, how accomplished you are academically. You won't be able to make those breakthroughs. You won't be able to do the things that are just that little bit beyond. It's about social capital. Yeah, that's the phrase. Yeah, and I took to heart what she said, and I made a point of building relationships with people who would be valuable, helpful, supportive, and in a position to do that. But all the while, without seeking to do that in any exploitative way, manipulative way.
How do you recommend we do personality profiling? I'm just as a radical departure. I'm just going to jump around, but what is personality profiling, and why is this important? You have this contact, Silas, and I think it's a really good example of personality profiling, cultural awareness, and things like that. And I think that's an important skill to build.
It is. I mean, I would say all I mean by personality profiling is getting to know somebody, really. Actually stopping to think about somebody. That's the difference, isn't it? We so often go through our lives and we come across somebody and we'll label them. We'll happily label them. I met Jordan the other day. He's a podcaster, broadcaster, whatever we call you. A celebrity personality. Let's go with that.
Sure. Nice. Laying it on thick.
I met Jules the other day. He's an author, former spy maybe. I met a doctor. It doesn't really tell us anything, does it? What I mean by profiling is actually, where does that person come from? You know, is it a doctor who was brought up in a family of doctors going back generations who didn't have to fight to get there, or were they born in northern Nigeria and had to fight even to get to a Western country where they could get the education and the training to become a doctor? So starting at that cultural level, really, it's just understanding where does somebody come from, giving you think about that others awareness. It also extends to contextual, situational awareness. Where does somebody come from? Because where they come from tells you a lot about who they are. Because you have to be a certain type of personality, a certain type of character to get from A to B.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's definitely a difference between somebody whose parents were both doctors, not that they didn't have to work hard to get there, but whose parents are both doctors and they were born and raised in Los Angeles and then went to medical school and came back and worked in their practice there. There's definitely a difference between that person and the person who, it went from Russia, came to the United States as a teenager, got into medical school, and their parents were both, I don't know, auto workers like mine or something like that. There is a difference in personality potentially based on the background of those people.
I think there is, and there's a difference in the way in which we will wish to engage with them, I think. Now, let me be absolutely clear. I am not belittling anybody in this. I'm not saying that if you're fortunate enough to be born with privilege, I don't blame anybody.
Yeah, lean into it, man.
Exactly.
We're all just jealous.
I would, with the exception of those people who take that privilege and squander it.
Sure.
I have no objection. I think that's, it's a wonderful thing that we can pass on knowledge, we can pass on wealth, and we can pass on contacts and social capital from generation to generation because we rise by lifting others. I genuinely believe that.
That's something I say in every show. I assume that.
I didn't know that, and I'm not actually joking.
I was like, that's pretty good, man. Where'd you pick that up?
Well, it must have been said to me by somebody who's already been on one of your shows.
Maybe. It's at the conclusion of every single show.
Well, they are. And no, I'm honestly, it shows that we're in sync in our views.
I suppose, but now I'm like,
I wasn't seeking
very deliberate.
I wasn't seeking to be manipulative.
No, it would have been too transparent. I don't think you would have done that. Man, it's quite fascinating. You mentioned organizational awareness and how spies pick their targets. I want to go back to the personality profiling in a bit, but you mentioned that you discuss organizational awareness. You think about it and find contacts who say know an industry well or are well connected because they're rich or they're famous or something like that. And I feel like this has been a background process of mine. And it can go wrong, right? If you're in Hollywood and you're just a social climber and you're trying to get around famous people, it's really transparent. But if you can make friends with people that maybe have deep connections in, I don't know, the fitness industry, wellness industry, and you're just friends with them and you rarely talk about fitness, but then when you go, I need to contact this person. They just have the Rolodex for days. And I feel like I've sort of naturally come by that for much of my life. And I'm that person for podcasting and digital media for those people, right?
I think there's a difference between targeting and networking. So lots of people,
yeah, let's talk about that.
I think lots of people mix the two up, and they misunderstand what I'm talking about when I use the phrase targeting. And we know people who are adept at building their Rolodeck. But there are two types of Rolodeck. There's a Rolodeck with a bunch of cards that mean absolutely nothing, because if you picked up the phone or email, the chances are that person will remember you. Your ship's that past in the night. And then there's targeting. And targeting is focusing on relationships because that relationship is meaningful for not necessarily just for your professional advancement, not necessarily just for your personal reasons, but it's advantageous in the widest possible terms. Sometimes that can be strictly personal. Sometimes that can be professional. Sometimes it can be for everybody. Sometimes it might be charitable. It might be philanthropic. But you get my point. There's a reason to develop that relationship, rather than that networking idea that, I've met somebody who's a sound engineer. I might need them one day. I'll put the card in a Rolodeck or put their number into my phone, forget about it till 5 years later, call them 5 years later, and they're like, well, who are you? And anyway, I've moved on and I'm now, I'm now glassblower. So what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, that's the difference. It's targeting to me, meaningful connection building. I use the phrase targeting, and it's, if you want to talk about that in the professional context, I talk about goals allies. You set your goals, you understand where you're going, you make an assessment of who the types of people that may be able to help you get there, may become goals allies on that journey, and then you target that type of person. And you can be doing that in a preparatory way, and spies do this all the time, by the way. Sometimes they might be thinking about targeting for problems which are way over the horizon. They're constantly looking ahead, thinking, well, where's the next geopolitical problem going to come from? Or you might be doing it for an immediate requirement. And the same goes for personal or professional targeting. But the difference between that and networking is, again, it's not just going to a conference and picking up as many cards as you can. It's, why am I here? What am I trying to achieve? Who would be best placed to come with me on that journey in a collaborative alliance, and then seek to engage with them and engage with them as an individual, rather than just a name or a function or a job. So
it's more depth, quality over quantity, which should surprise no one who's listened to the show before. But I find that that's quite interesting, because it seems like we talk about that a lot on the show. It's common in your profession, and yet people will literally go and meet as many people as they can and collect the business cards. Never get a follow-up email from them. Maybe you hear from them 3 years later, or they follow up, but it's like there's no action here. There's no reason for us to really stay connected that I can think of, other than you're casually maybe going to ask me for something in a few weeks.
That's right. That's really transparent, isn't it? Especially if somebody contacts you and they haven't seen you in 3 years. Like, hey, remember me? We met in San Jose, and be like, well, why are you calling me? You want something, don't you? And it's immediate. Again, remember what we said a short while ago. We instinctively know these things, and we don't necessarily react harshly as a result, but we instinctively know these things. Whereas if you're spending time building up quality relationships, that shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
There's a parallel here, and this is a passion of mine. I'm sure we would come to it anyway, but I'm going to jump the gun a little bit, which is about networking online. For me, there's targeting, then there's networking in person, and then there's building up thousands and thousands of friends online. Okay, fine. If you're an influencer and that's your job, and you are seeking to reach a wide audience, and for somebody like you, as wide an audience as possible, absolutely right. For the vast majority of us, it makes very little difference if you have 10 friends on whatever
LinkedIn,
social media, or you have 10,000. It really makes very little difference apart from manageability. And so this striving for likes, for connections and all the rest of it, I think that's probably going to do an awful lot of harm to young people. And the young people are who I'm trying to reach with this book, by the way. Because what I really want to say to them is get out there, meet people, build meaningful relationships.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
Obsessing with like. Oh, God.
It's a tall order, man.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people measure the quality of their social circle in the amount of people that they have, especially, or followers or whatever, because it seems, it shows a visible, tangible metric of popularity, which is, I think people mistake popularity for real connection. And that is a huge mistake, especially in the professional sphere. A lot of people might know who you are, but that doesn't mean, and that means you're popular, but that doesn't mean that they're connected with you or that they feel necessarily some affinity for you. It's just that they know who you are. It can actually be bad depending on the industry that you're in, I would imagine.
I think that's probably right. Now, and there's a distinction to be made between using it as a tool, as a means, or tools as an end in it. A tool as an end in itself. If your end in itself is to have 20,000 followers and numerous likes every time you put something out on whatever social media it is, that's pointless. Now, of course, if you've developed something, a capability, a genuine capability, a genuine talent, you genuinely have something that is to be consumed, whether that's a talent for podcasting, whether it's a talent for writing, whether it's a talent for singing, and you seek followers so that you have as wide an audience as possible, that's an entirely different thing. Again, that's true. It's not targeting. That's a different thing. That's building your customer base.
That's right. That's totally different. You mentioned in the book, you ask who has access to the information that we want and how do we structure an approach that they're likely to be receptive to. The great example of this is you volunteering for this campaign. Tell me about that, because you ended up, I guess, finagling for, like, do you use that word here? Finagling a spot in the House of Commons. And you're sorting essentially these boring papers, but then you're gaining access and you're gaining experience with these sort of blue blood upper class folks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was the particular end point here was that I wanted to have Winston Churchill as my referee on when I was coming out of university and trying to find my first job. Back in those days, a very long time ago, paper curriculum vitae sent out by post with a stamp on it, covering national, all the rest of it. And a very important part of that was to have two referees.
Like references? Is that okay? Yeah. When we say referees, sorry, with a whistle.
Two people prepared to give you references or testimonials.
Okay.
And I had volunteered. I was quite active in the Conservative Party in my youth, and I'd volunteered to work in the 1989 European elections, which was great fun, actually. Going at campaigning, it was enormously good fun, and I was working with a fantastic candidate who went on to sit in the House of Lords, and I've got a great deal of time for him. And but in the process, I thought, well, rather than just doing this for its own sake, what am I trying to achieve? So I thought the next step needs to be to get to work in the House of Commons, and there's a cadre of research staff in the House of Commons. So every time during this campaign, somebody from a senior leadership from the Conservative Party, which was then in government, came along to campaign with us, I would make a point of getting to know them, making sure, almost obsequiously carrying their bags around with them, chatting to them, asking how, trying to build a relationship. And at the end of each day, say to them, do you know of anybody who needs a research assistant? And 9 times out of 10, the answer came back no. But on one occasion, it came back yes, and I ended up working in the House of Commons as a research assistant to an MP, no longer sitting. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to have a really big name, And so I sat down with a list of serving MPs, and the first one that jumped off the page at me was Winston Churchill. I thought, I've got to have Winston Churchill as a reference. Mm-hmm. And so I set about cultivating him. I made a point of finding out what were his areas of parliamentary interest. When did he contribute to debates? What did he say? What angle is he coming from? What are his interests in foreign affairs? And there was a Reuters feed outside his office, so I would sort of linger by the Reuters feed, wait till he came by, and then make a comment about something that I knew that he'd be interested in. So I was thinking about him. You know, it sounds manipulative, but in actual fact, I was thinking about his interests. I was giving him a reason to engage.
Exactly. If somebody does this to me and sets up a news alert for North Korea and then emails me when something interesting comes up, I'm not thinking, you manipulative SOB. Right. I'm thinking, oh, this person took the time to set this up so they could get my attention, and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's what I was doing. Some people do think it's manipulative. I clearly don't. You clearly don't. Whether it was or not, the end result was I was able to say to him, do you need a research assistant? Mm-hmm. He said, I don't, but I do need a speechwriter. So I became a speechwriter for Winston Churchill.
That was a gutsy move for him to just be like, actually, you must have been so fresh-faced. And he's like, I want you to write the things that I say in public. That's...
I know. And actually, the funny postscript to that is there's one speech which he gave, and I want to get hold of a copy of Hansard for this, because there's one speech I gave where it was so poorly written, and I admit that now. I look back on it. It was gauche. It was ill-informed. And
I mean, isn't that the politicians... That's what they do, is they say things that are gauche and ill-informed. I think you were probably right on target, man. You were just ahead of your time.
I read the room.
Yeah.
But the respondent to it, his phrase was, if I recall correctly, I don't know who writes the Honourable Gentleman's speeches, but I suggest he finds a new assistant, something along those lines. Winston sent me a copy of it kindly by post. But he was amused by it, as was I. And he went on actually to give me a really lovely reference and helped me to get my first job at an organisation of stockbrokers, which I wouldn't have expected to get into back in those days. It was very much dominated by fee-paying school. We call them public school.
So we call them private school.
But you call them private
school.
Right,
so this is like upper crust, super educated people who have, I don't know, played polo on weekends or something.
Absolutely. Everybody called Cazenove the blue-blooded stockbrokers, and they were reputed to be the Queen's stockbrokers.
How did you fit in?
I didn't. Not in the
Okay.
I mean, I was fortunate that I worked with some consummately charming people, and they all embraced me. But there was and they respected the fact that I was, I think, just about. I was a reasonable economist. So in that context, I wouldn't put myself up as an academic economist, but they respected my professional ability, and over time we got to know one another. But there was always what I call a glass partition. And so we know about the glass ceiling.
Sure,
I could have probably gone all the way up to partnership in that firm if I'd stayed there. But there would always have been that glass partition between me and the other people. They had a different way of speaking. They did different things. They went to different places. They knew each other. They went to each other's country estates.
Right.
I was never going to be part of that.
It's one of those things where people say, "Oh yeah, Vale, the snow was terrible this year," and I go, "I would not know."
That's right.
Because my parents took me to a lake that you can't put boats on, and they told me I should go ice fishing, and I didn't catch anything else. You know, it's just like...
Well, I mean, I have
it's similar.
An equivalent story to that I took a message from one of my colleagues while they were out at lunch one day, and it was somebody calling to organise a skiing trip, and they said, could you just leave a message that I'll meet this person at Val d'Isère? And I'd never heard of Val d'Isère.
Is that French?
It's a skiing resort.
Okay.
And
here we go.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard of it. And so I said, well, would you spell it for me? No, I didn't say, I didn't dare ask if they would spell it for me. I spelled it phonetically.
Oh, yeah. How did that go?
So I wrote it.
This is pre-Google.
Exactly. And I came back. I then went out and came back a bit later, and there was a group of people around the desk all laughing at the way that I'd spelled Val d'Isère. And, you know, I look back on it, and it's excruciating.
Yeah, oh man, that hurts.
But it taught me something, actually. which is a little bit of humility, which is important too, and just sometimes just ask. I mean, I could have said, if I just said to my boss, who was an absolutely fabulous guy, I've got a lot of time for him, and if I just said to him, John, I don't really know what this is, he'd have just told me and he wouldn't have judged me.
Right.
But talking of him,
I think we have a bad connection. Can you spell that? Oh, of course, Valdezet. No, naturally.
Yeah, I wasn't quite that sharp back in those days. But talking of John, my boss, the end to that story really is that I said to him, I don't really belong here. This is a totally different social class and so on. Why on earth did you employ me? And he said, well, I had to employ you really because I wanted to phone the House of Commons and ask to speak to Winston Churchill. Now, just to be absolutely clear to everybody listening out there who's confused, it's Winston Churchill, the grandson that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Rather
You're not that old.
I'm not that old. I look old. I'm not that old.
One thing I love about the book is you talk about how to tailor outreach, how to use social media like Facebook or LinkedIn, and use the you may also know connections and things like that. I do get a lot of pitches, some of the things you say not to do. I do get a lot of things like, you don't know me, but 17-paragraph letter, the ask is somewhere in the middle, maybe at the bottom. Now I have an AI thing that reads it and summarizes it. It comes with Superhuman, which is my email client. But I don't want to have to look at that. I usually just don't read it. If it's too long, I can't spend 20 minutes reading your email when it's your life story followed by, and so can I come on your show or something like that. It's not going to work. You tailor the outreach and you talk about what to do instead. But one of the best rules of thumb is respecting boundaries and don't stalk. I don't have this problem yet, thankfully, but the rule of thumb is, would this person be happy that I know this about them? That is a really good heuristic, because I think there's quite a few people that will try and say something about me in an email that's personal, and it's very clear that they asked a lot of people and then got a story, and it doesn't creep me out, but it's weird. It's a little invasive and it doesn't make any sense, when what they could have done is said something like, I know you're interested in travel in North Korea, and I heard on your show that you went to Paris and you liked it and you think French food is great. I mean, something along those lines is fine. There's a really fine line between, hey man, you did your homework, and get off my porch.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think anything makes up, or don't think anything replaces instinct on that front. Actually, we've just got to instinctively know when you're overstepping that boundary.
Right.
It would be like if somebody sent you an email, for instance, with the title "We Rise by Lifting Others." Now, I would say that's right on the margin. It's like, of course, they know we, as you've just explained, it's a catchphrase of yours. It might catch your eye, but it could also just be seen as a little bit too on the edge. I wouldn't do it. I would say my instinct would tell me that you wouldn't react particularly well to that, because it's like, why are you just playing that back at me? And it's not. Yeah,
it's a little basic, I suppose. What other ways people have done this? They'll send me, somebody went to a coffee shop and the wall said, we rise by lifting others. It was just a phrase that was on the wall of this coffee shop in the middle of it. So they sent me a picture of it, and they said, this reminded me of you. And then they said, I love your show. And by the way, I thought this guy would be really interesting. Yes, I'm his publicist, but that's not why I'm doing it. And I read the pitch.
Yeah, no, you see, I like that, because it's actually saying, okay, here's a third party, a third party thing that's going on that I'm connecting to. So you're triangulating. So if I just play something back at you by just quoting you in your own in your own words in an email, okay, it's not bad, but it's not great. But that thing of saying, okay, I saw this and thought of you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's doing two things, isn't it? That's saying, I thought of you. That's quite important, because we all like people to be thinking about us. Doesn't matter who we are, let's put our hands up. And it's also saying, I know enough about you and I'm sufficiently interested in you, not only to think of you, but to think of you in connection with something, whether that's a phrase or a way of thinking.
And if you know that they're a little bit cheeky like me, you can be a little edgier with it. I found that a lot of guys respond well to this. I'll see if There was some sign I saw in a bathroom that said something a little bit vulgar, and I took a photo of it and I sent it to somebody and I said, "This reminded me of you." And they called me because they were laughing so hard. It had to do with the length of someone's member and standing close enough to the urinal not to make a mess, basically. And I was like, I don't know why, but this reminded me of you. And
I want to say we've all been there.
You son of a, it's one of those. And you can play with that a little bit, but yeah, would they be happy? Basically, are they going to be smile when they see this, or are they going to close the window blinds because they're a little bit unnerved by the fact that you know this?
I would say to people, use your instinct, and if your instinct is telling you no, just don't do it.
Just don't do it. Yeah,
don't take the risk.
Nothing is creepier than finding out somebody's done a little bit too much homework on you.
Yeah,
I didn't care as much until I had kids. Now I'm like, okay. Now you're not invading my privacy; it's my kids and my wife's privacy, and that's not okay.
No, I know exactly what you mean, and it was people able to find out so much about anyone who has anything of a public profile through AI.
AI, yeah.
The worst, I think, is when you get something that's clearly been AI generated, and they've got AI to look at something. And so I've had emails. I mean, I'm fairly liberal with my email address, and perhaps I shouldn't be, but I've had emails come to me where you can see it's the same font as was delivered by a particular AI machine, and they haven't bothered to change the font from the first sentence that says, "I read your book and I really loved it." And I had one particular one, just I very quickly tell this story because I think it illustrates a hell of a lot. I had one that started exactly like that. I read your book, thought it was fantastic. I'm a book promoter, and I think we could do really great work together. And here's what I do: AI chunk of text.
Yeah.
Right.
Copy paste. Spacing is different.
Yeah. And then signed off. And I wrote back and I said, interesting. But I was honest with this person. I said, I think it feels to me like you probably just copied and pasted from AI there, but I'm going to give you another shot. So would you mind telling me what it is particularly about my book that you like?
No response.
No, they came back and said, could you send me a link to it?
Oh, gosh. So they had lied about reading the book. Yeah.
I mean, so that clearly is at the very far end of the spectrum.
But this is a good point. This is a good point. We're not just whining here, people, because a bad pitch or recruiting pass or whatever you attempt is worse than one that is just not successful for another reason. In that if it's not successful, let's say I get a pitch where somebody goes, "This guy'd be super interesting," and I go, "Actually, he's been on the show before," and they go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I sent this from my phone. I should have searched your website. Here's another person I think would be interesting. I searched your website. You haven't had them on yet." Fine, you get another chance.
Yeah.
Should you have searched my site? Yes, but it's not the end of the world. However, the person who writes with AI, "I loved your latest episode with Andrew Callahan, who did this. AI summary of episode. Paragraph about me, paragraph about what I want." So I now have read this whole thing, and then I go, I've already had this guy in the freaking website. This email must have taken them 20 minutes to write. Oh, wait, no, AI did it, and they sent this 100 times. Yeah. So then I just block their entire email. I'm never going to hear from them again. So it's actually better to have a slight little mistake that took me a few seconds to read and correct than a long thing that looks like you put effort into it but was completely fake. Something about getting bamboozled just really pisses me off, and I can't be the only person who feels that way.
No, I get it. And I want to echo what you said there. This isn't whining. Actually, this is the reason I think we're both telling these stories is to help people, because
of course.
It is tricky. I mean, let's be honest about this. It's hard. Selling yourself is hard. None of us is comfortable doing it. We hate writing those emails, with some rare exceptions. We certainly don't want to make cold phone calls to do it. All the rest of it. This is hard to do. So if you're going to do it, don't waste your time by doing it in a ham-fisted way. Is what I would say. And the book, the chapter in the book where I talk about this, I call the perfect pitch, because ultimately a spy is pitching somebody as well. They're effectively just saying, "I need something from you." And I'm going to give you a reason why you might want to give that to me, because that's all it's about. But until the basic point is, in the lead up to that, as I go through in the book, you've got the targeting, you've got the use of cover, you've got cultivation, you've got use of elicitation, assessment of the motivations, all of that. And then only then do you think about a pitch. Obviously, it's different when we're talking about somebody wanting to help me with publicize my book, or somebody coming on your podcast, but the same principles apply. And don't fall at the first hurdle by sending something that you haven't properly researched or haven't properly thought through. And if in doubt, simply this, I say to people, just put yourself in that other person's shoes for a bit. If you got that email, how would you feel? because that will tell you an awful lot.
Yeah, I think the truth is people think they're getting away with it with the AI thing, and they're not.
I'm really not.
They're really not. Any sort of template that you think looks good from AI, realize that AI is telling every person pitching my show to use that exact same template. And it's really obvious.
Yeah.
And it's a way to set you into my immediate do not read box, because I'm getting 30 of those per day. And people are going, I don't care, I'm not booking for a podcast. If you're trying to find a job, you're probably doing the same thing. You're sending an email to somebody in an industry and they're going, not another one of these stupid AI things from a guy who graduated from a college program and thinks you're going to write this to me. They're seeing so much of this. I want to switch gears. You have a really interesting anecdote about being in the elevator in Zimbabwe. It's not quite related to what we're discussing, but I love this.
It sort of comes back to targeting, really, and a bit of thinking on your feet. But the biggest lesson about that is what you can pull out of the bag when you're panicking, really. So the brief background there, I've had many years of engagement and dealings with Zimbabwe, which is a beautiful, beautiful country full of amazing people. It's a great tragedy that its leadership has let it down so badly over the past decades. And I've travelled back and to and from there for many, many years. One particular time I went there, 2008, was after a really seriously unpleasant election period during which a lot of people had lost their lives. The opposition candidate, Morgan Tsvangirai, pulled out because he felt that the threat to his supporters was too great. And then Mugabe had then gone on to win by 99% or something.
Oh, yeah. Some very believable.
We know the playbook.
Right.
But it was a febrile atmosphere. And one thing that the then President Mugabe had done was whip out very anti-British sentiment. He blamed Britain for everything. As the former colonialists, we were responsible for his disastrous economic policies. We were responsible for hyperinflation. We were responsible for the state of the roads, you name it. And I travelled there soon after the election to go and see a friend of mine who happened to be a very senior figure in the government in Mugabe's party, had been to a university near where I was born, and we'd really struck it off. And I'd gone in to see him, actually just relationship maintenance. I wasn't after anything. He was on the top floor of the ZANU-PF building, which is based, and I'm not joking, it's based on a street called Rotten Row, the ZANU-PF headquarters, which I don't know whether they were aware of the irony of that when they selected that address.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was coming out of the meeting, which had gone very well. We got on very well, had a cup of coffee and ate some cake, as I recall. I got into a lift, and I'm slightly claustrophobic. Talk about being the sorts of things that you wouldn't expect somebody with this sort of background to have. A bit of claustrophobia is not necessarily what you might expect from somebody who seeks work in the intelligence field, but it is what it is. And but I'd sort of forced myself to get into the lift because the lights were out in the stairwell, and it would probably have been quite dangerous to go down it. And then came down one floor, lift doors opened again, and this group of people got in. The first two were sort of wearing suits, looking fairly respectable, and then a group after them of God knows how many, 15 maybe, people dressed in sort of ragged clothes but carrying pangas, which are those long curved blades.
It's like a machete kind of thing?
Like a machete, basically.
In an office building?
In an office building. They were yeah.
Okay. I might get out of the elevator at that point.
Well, I was sort of penned at the back. Because I
have to go to the bathroom.
I was going to try and part the way of the pangas, but I thought I'd just hold my breath, literally, because they all stank of local beer, which they'd obviously stoked up, and they were on their way to campaign, shall we put it in inverted commas, and often that meant going to an opposition rally and beating a few people up, or worse, hence the pangas. So it was uncomfortable. But I thought, one of those, you're right. I mean, I should probably have got out.
Yeah, maybe.
No, I'm here.
Yeah. I'm committed to the bit. All right.
Start going down again. And then suddenly, big jolt, and the lift stops between two floors, which is bad enough. And I'm beginning to think, okay, I'm claustrophobic. I'm surrounded by people with pangas. I'm British. They hate the Brits. This isn't stacking up terribly well. And then the lights went out. So I had a mobile phone, fairly rudimentary one, but it did have a torch. So I reached into my pocket because I was just, by this point, I just needed some light. I needed to see what was going on, and illuminated the situation with the torch, which of course just drew attention to me. So suddenly I've got all these people with their pangas, stinking of local brew, saying, who are you? You're a Brit. You're a spy. What are you doing here? We don't welcome you here. What are you a colonialist? All of this stuff. And it was threatening to get quite nasty. But I noticed that of the two gentlemen who got in first, leading this group, first of all, they were wearing suits, so that told me something. They're probably senior. And number two, I noticed on the lapel of one of them, he was wearing a little enamel badge, and it just said United. Now, I don't know how much your audience will know about football.
Some people will.
In the UK.
Yeah, I have no...
Our Premier League soccer is or was dominated by a team called Manchester United back then. Back then, it had a roll call of some incredible players, as I understand it. Now, I know nothing about soccer,
okay, we're on the same page then.
But I did know that if I saw somebody wearing an enamel badge that said United, chances were it meant Manchester United. And so I just gambled. I just turned around to him and I said, how was the match the other day? And I had no idea if there'd been a match.
Sure.
And I had certainly no idea who would have won it. I literally don't think I've ever seen a soccer match from beginning to end in my life. But it was worth a shot. Excuse the pun again. And it worked. And he sort of looked at me for a bit, sort of quite quizzically, and he said, yeah, it was good, actually. Ronaldo was playing really well. And then somebody else said, no, it's not Ronaldo, it's this other player. And within a few seconds, the whole attention had shifted from me to football, soccer, British soccer. And there was a healthy debate going on about who was the best player in Manchester United at that time. And I had been completely forgotten. By the time I left that lift, we were rescued, taken to the ground floor, I was exchanging my telephone number with the guy with the United badge, and that was another way in to quite a senior person within the party as it happened.
That's great. Hey, I'll give you a call next time I'm about to get stabbed with a panga. And you can rescue me.
Just look for the evidence of something else. There's a technique called blue catting as well.
Blue catting?
It's slightly related. It's not quite. It's the idea that people say, I bet I can make you think of a blue cat, and immediately you're thinking of a blue cat, and you can't stop thinking of a blue cat as long as I'm saying blue cat to you. It's a distraction technique. So all I was effectively doing was just saying, okay, this isn't. The focus is on me. I need the focus to be somewhere else.
Oh, interesting.
So I was doing a version of blue catting by saying, I'm going to invite you all now to expend your mental energies talking about something which I knew, to be fair, I knew enough about Africa to know that soccer is incredibly popular. And Manchester United was by far and away the most successful and popular team on that continent.
I feel like I've done this by accident. I had a police experience when I was in former Yugoslavia, and they were very upset with me. And I've told the story on the show before, so I'll skip the details. But basically, they were figuring out when and how they were going to beat me up, basically. And I started talking about food and different kinds of drinks. And it shifted from them figuring out which, how many holes to put in me, I'm sure, to this place does not have the best burgers. You guys don't know what you're talking about. They weren't burgers, but this place and the drinks over here are good, but the drinks over that I make in my, bathtub or whatever are even better. And, this stuff is too commercial. And I remember my friend was getting his ass kicked in the next room. And I thought, man, he should have talked about Pleskovica because he might be going differently. So that's the blue catting thing, right? I mean, it's just basically
it's a version
took
of
the energy away from redirected the conversation.
Exactly, because if you're in a conflict situation, which is what this is, your mind is geared to conflict. If you insert something into the mind that jostles with the mental space. That helps. It's not going to work every single time.
Sure.
But it's always worth a shot. I mean, far be it from me to promote smoking on your show. But one thing I did used to do when I was traveling frequently in Africa was carry a packet of cigarettes. Because even if I wasn't smoking myself, if you do get into a conflict situation, the first thing you do is offer somebody something. Well, it does a couple of things. First of all, it, as I say, creates them.
Maybe it keeps their hands busy.
Keeps their hands busy.
They get less stabby when they're smoking.
And creates a sense of obligation. That human sense of reciprocity, you've given me something, so I owe you something, is very, very strong.
Sure.
So if the thing that you owe me is to not stab me,
right? Yeah,
that'll be a good start.
Yeah. I'll take that trade. No kidding. In the book, you go over different types of cover, which I thought was really interesting. There's differences between saying what you were really doing in Africa, which resulted in people saying that you were a spy, and then just leaving it at the sort of boring, I'm a consultant, and then everybody's praying you don't say anything else about your job at that point.
Hang on.
But I thought the note that overlapped with the undercover cops and undercover law enforcement that I have on the show is keep it close, keep your cover story close to the truth, ensure plausibility. So if you're shy, you don't say that you're a performer, and make it about something that you know about. This guy I ran into on an airplane a while ago, he was an older guy. He told me about how he got recruited by the CIA, probably, I guess it must have been in the 80s.
Right.
And he was like, I don't get it. I work for Ford in Indonesia. He was like the head of Ford in Indonesia.
Right.
And they were like,
cover.
That's what we need, because no one's going to go, you're CIA, because you are so well known in the business community in Indonesia, and you're going and having dinner at the president's house because you're the head of Ford in Indonesia, whatever it was. And so that was actually perfect. And he's like, he told me this on the airplane, and he goes, I didn't know anything about being a spy. And they said, that's good. We don't want you to act like a spy. We want you to act like the head of Ford in Indonesia and just tell us information that you get from the people that you go to parties with, basically.
It's great, isn't it? It's the best cover sometimes is being yourself.
Yeah,
and the authenticity bit is what that draws me back to. You can't possibly. I mean, cover as I talk about in the book can be defensive in the sense of, if you are a spy and you're in a difficult place, you don't want to be advertising the fact that you are. So just present yourself as something bland, anodyne, boring. The more boring, the better. Just don't draw attention to yourself. That's defensive cover. Much more interesting, I think, for your, some people will be very interested in that, but others will be more interested in what I call offensive cover, which isn't quasi-militaristic, so forgive the term, but I can't really think of a better one. What I mean by offensive cover is the way in which you present yourself to make yourself interesting to another person. What is it how do you come across to draw another person to you? And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pretend to be something you're not. It's just that they'll pretend to know something that you don't. And the more that you understand the thing you're presenting as, the better, obviously, because authenticity shines through every single time.
So it seems like a good offensive cover would be, let me think. Let's say that you're a Russian hockey player living in the United States. You spent most of your adult life here in the NHL playing for the Detroit Red Wings. They send you back to Russia. You're hanging out with Vladimir Putin, right? That's good offensive, right? You're a celebrity. You're well known. Yeah. You're not saying you're not lying about being a hockey player. I mean,
But if you genuinely are,
you're genuinely a professional hockey player. Yeah. But then, like, hey, when you go to Putin's palace, we'd love to know about the security measures that they've got over there. Pay special attention to these kinds of things. I don't know. I'm trying to think of.
Well, I'll give you a really obvious, easy. I'm sure this will have occurred to many people. It's not giving away any secrets.
Sure.
I think one really powerful potential cover is recruitment consultant.
Like for business, like jobs, essentially.
Yeah, because that gives you a professional recruiter, because that gives you an opportunity to go. First of all, you don't have to be expert in anything, if you think about it.
That's true. All right, I got that going for me.
Second, you've got a good excuse to talk to lots of people. Because of course the first thing you come up against whenever you're trying to build a relationship, which is ultimately aimed at getting somebody to give you something that they don't necessarily want to share with you, is, why are you asking me this question?
Oh, I use this all the time. I ask people these deep personal questions and I go, hey, no obligation to respond, but I'm a journalist covering this for a podcast. Right. And they go, fine, off the record.
Right.
They'll tell me all kinds of personal things.
Absolutely. Now, journalism is a difficult one for the agencies to use because it's checkable, obviously. Right. So,
unless you're a BS jourналist like me, right? You can check it all you want. I actually do have a podcast.
Well, quite.
Believe it or not.
But again, there we go back. That comes back round to if you can have somebody working with you who's genuinely doing the thing that they do, which gives them the opportunity to go and ask the questions. Brilliant. I'll tell you, actually being around here put me in mind of something. a few years back, we were filming Spies, and we filmed down in Granary Square, which is just by St Pancras and King's Cross. And I was with the production crew, and they were scouting around for locations. And boy, going in and telling somebody at a reception, "Hey, I'm a production assistant scouting for a location," opens a lot of doors.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just putting it out there for anybody who might be interested.
Oh my gosh.
It's one of those things where people are like, "Oh wow, seriously, I might be on TV, so come on in."
Whenever I did this for a while, I probably shouldn't have been this, but whatever. There's a lot of nice roof decks in New York, and I went back there after living in Hollywood for a while, and I met this guy who was a location scout, and he told me all about how his job worked, and I thought it was really fascinating. And then when I went back to New York, I remember thinking, I always wanted to check out all these roof decks. So I started to just go into the base, where the doorman is, and go, "Hey, I'm location scouting something for Paramount. Can I check out the roof deck? You can obviously escort me. I just want to go up there, take maybe a couple of photos." And they were like, "Let me call the manager." And the building manager was like, "Somebody from Hollywood wants to see the private roof deck? Absolutely." So I just would go up there. I'd bring girls up there, and I'd be like, "Watch this. We're going to go to the roof deck."
There you go. See, you're instinctively thinking like a
yeah. It was awesome. There were some very nice private roof decks,
I bet,
in Manhattan, and you're just thinking, man, this is wasted on the person who actually has access to this thing.
Some hedge fund manager who never uses it.
Yeah, hedge fund manager who never uses it, or it's a common area for a company, but nobody works in the office in that location, or they never go up there because they just smoke up there, or they ban smoking up there, so everybody just goes downstairs now, and it's like, man, this is really, really nice. Yeah, it's really incredible. Oh, it has a full view, panoramic view, Statue of Liberty, and you're just thinking like, there's nobody up here.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Or they only go up there for lunch. They never go up there any other time. So you go up there in the afternoon or in the evening. It's just amazing.
Again, situational awareness. I mean, situational awareness is great for all of us because it's equivalent to mindfulness, isn't it? Just take a little bit of time to appreciate what you've got, guys. Just get out there, and if you've got access to one of those roof decks, go and enjoy it, and just drop into yourself for 5 minutes. And enjoy the fact that you are where you are. But I have to say, on that note about location scouts, that is a job. In another life, that's the one I want to do. Yeah. I think it must be so interesting.
You probably go to some of the same places that you went to as a security consultant.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yeah. Tell me about your trip to Congo. That was a location scouting experience going wrong.
Yes. So with this one, there we do get into consulting as a very useful cover. Because on that occasion, I was working for a mining company that had interest in the east of the Congo. And at that time, there had been a war which had drawn in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and had been incredibly bloody. It was so deadly that it was known as Africa's Third World War.
Oh, man.
And it affected primarily the east of the country, where there's a lot of minerals. And I had a client who wanted to understand, as the war had come to apparently a close, because a peace deal had been signed, they wanted to know, is it possible to go back in? Can we commence our operations there? And they asked me to go in and find out for them, which was the sort of thing which I used to really enjoy doing. Now I think about it, I'm like, what on earth was I thinking of? But back then I was younger, and I jumped on a plane and ended up, of all places, in Kinshasa. Now, I'm sure many of your listeners will instantly pick up on the fact that Kinshasa is about as far west of the DRC as you can possibly get, the Congo.
Many of the people who listen to the show are Americans, and I will join them in saying we don't know anything about geography, so nobody knows that Kinshasa is in the west.
So to set this in context, the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the biggest countries, I think, if not geographically, the biggest country in Africa, and it basically occupies that central chunk, and its width is about 2/3 of the width of the entire continent. So I was meant to be looking at what was going on in the east on the border with Rwanda and Uganda, but I've flown to Kinshasa, which is all the way on the other side of the continent on the west coast. And the reason I'd done that is because I knew a chap there who was a former military leader who was now had by that point been appointed to the Transitional National Assembly, which was their sort of transitional parliament, as they're implementing the ceasefire deal. And Patrice had agreed to meet me in Kinshasa, and we were going to fly together, probably on a UN flight, something like that, or on a DRC government flight to the east, and he would help me to make contacts and make an assessment of the situation on the ground truth, essentially. So I'd flown into Kinshasa, and the night before I had gone through Johannesburg, and I'd stayed in a place in Sandton. Sandton is a really upmarket part of Johannesburg, 5-star hotels and all the rest of it. And I got chatting to a chap, let's call him Paul. Let's call him Paul Hamilton. The name doesn't matter. The name I use in the book is not his real name, obviously.
I would hope not. Okay.
So I got chatting to this chap, and we'd had a pleasant evening together. We'd had dinner together, and his job was head of African government engagement for a really, really well-known consulting firm. Now, I won't go any further than that. It was it's a name that if I said it, every listener would understand what I was talking about, and pretty much everybody across the world would have heard of this organization. And I had his business card in my top pocket, my breast pocket. The following day, having arrived in Kinshasa, I went to go and find my friend Patrice, and the best way I could do that was to go and find him in his office at the Palais de Peuple, which was where the Transitional National Assembly was meeting. I turned up there only to find, at the appointed time, I'd said, I'll see you next week on this day. And I discovered the place was absolutely deserted. I mean, literally nobody there at all. So, and weirdly, I was able to get into the building. So the doors were open. I walked in, wandered around these deserted corridors, knocked on a few doors, couldn't find anybody, literally nobody there at all. And I thought, what's gone wrong here? This is really very strange. So I got on my phone, and I was trying to call Patrice. It was a really bad reception. Mobile telephony back in those days wasn't that good anyway, and I was in the middle of... I had my head down as I was pushing my way out of the door, and I suddenly felt this slap to my hand, and I had the phone hit the ground and go skidding across the tarmac. And I looked up, and I was looking right into the barrel of an AK-47. And I was surrounded by soldiers. Soldiers who were acting as police, security guards for the Palais de Peuple, who obviously hadn't done a very good job. Because they were round the back,
gambling and around the side of the building.
Exactly, so sinking the odd beer or whatever. But they were quite angry, obviously, and they wanted to know what I was doing there. And I said, well, I would phone Patrice and get you to talk to him, but my phone's broken.
Yeah,
and they weren't having any of it. Their position was that I was in the wrong place, the wrong time. The word spy came up, because it always does. And I said, they were demanding that I explain what brought me there. And so I thought, well, I've got a shot at this, and hands up. I sort of said, I explain what I'm doing here. I work for an international consulting company. And we've been taken on by your president because he wants to understand better the terms and conditions and salaries for the army, because he's looking at how he can improve them as the ceasefire deal is implemented. So I was immediately just reaching for something I knew that they would be interested in.
Right.
And of course,
I'm here to talk to your president about giving you guys a raise.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, there was a certain amount of suspicion. Can you prove who you say you are? How do we know you're telling the truth? So I said, well, if I could just lower my hands. And I reached into my top pocket and I pulled out a business card. And I handed
for the guy you met at the bar the night before? Oh, my goodness.
My name is. Right. And that was enough. This was, thank God we weren't talking about the days of internet and AI, because they could have very quickly checked that.
Well, they would have just tried to call him.
I just needed, I like to say that's a clever cover story.
Sure.
I lied. I just made up a lie. Right there and then, because it was the easiest way. I couldn't say, look, I'm here to work out what's going on in your war zone in the east of the country. Because that's probably going to fuel your suspicion that
that you're a spy.
Exactly. So, but it turned out that unit had previously been in the east of the country, and we got chatting. And I had my packet of cigarettes, and I doled those out, and we sat down and we got chatting, and we spoke for about 2 hours, partly about terms and conditions and salaries, but also partly about conditions in the east. So they went a long way towards telling me everything that I needed to know without me actually ever having to set foot in that war zone.
But even though you avoided the war zone, you still almost got shot. So
there's a special knack there.
That's right. You have talent. Tell me, building rapport is obviously this. Well, you got lucky a few times, but it's a skill that you have. And this story of Maria at the bar in Roppongi illustrates it pretty well also. I'd love to get that one out of you.
Well, so this was, I was not in I was in a professional contest, but I wasn't trying to conduct elicitation for intelligence reasons. I was working at that time with a Japanese bank, stockbrokers, in fact. And I'd gone to Tokyo, where I was basically schmoozing some clients, and the clients decided to take me to Roppongi. Now, Roppongi is effectively the red light district of Tokyo.
Yeah.
So basically a bunch of...
But it's also where isn't the U.S. Embassy there?
I don't think it's very far away, actually.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
So
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, which one came first?
Cover.
Yeah, which one was there first? I don't know.
So there's lots of people sneaking about for all sorts of different reasons.
Right.
Actually, to be fair, there was no sneaking about going to this topless bar.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you were sneaking.
We just, it was absolutely bald-faced, let's go and sit in a bar and watch women take their clothes off, which is basically what it's all about, while drinking exorbitantly priced cocktails.
Sure.
Now, in the course of this, it became clear that not only were you able to sit and watch women taking their clothes off, if somebody was prepared to pay for it, you could also go and have a private dance in the back. And I was young, in my 20s, and I've never liked this sort of thing anyway. But frankly, I was a bit terrified. I was like, this is like
it's skeezy.
It's skeezy. Yeah, I was not happy, but I was with clients, so they got a wad of yen out, and they're like, okay, we're going to pay for you to go and have a private dance. And this woman, Maria, in inverted commas, was allocated to me, and we went into this horrible little area where it had some, down each side. It was a corridor, and down each side it just had little cubicles which you had a damask curtain across. And there was a seat in there and a mat in front, and it was just like this whole thing is just and an ashtray.
Right.
I mean, the whole setup.
And no hand sanitizer. Can you believe it?
Nothing exactly. Pre-COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, really just quite horrible. And so I sat down, and Maria sort of pushed me into this little stool, and then she started taking her clothes off. And I'm like, please don't do that. I really don't want you to do that. And initially she was really upset. She was like, well, don't you find me attractive? This. And I'm like, no, it's really not that. And I said, I've got to come up with a reason. So I said, well, I'm getting married, and I don't think it's fair. That was enough. So I said, but she said, well, okay, but we've got 10 minutes. What do we do? So I said, well, just sit and talk to me, maybe, So she sat down on this sort of tiny little stool together, and we shared a cigarette. And cigarettes are quite a theme. I'm not an advocate of it. I have them for many years.
Sure sounds like you do. Yeah.
But yes, they were quite a big part of my life for many years. And so we got chatting, and very quickly it became clear that she didn't want to talk about her background at all. She was extremely jumpy about it, until I told her about some personal matters in my own background, some of which we touched on today. And my sharing of vulnerability with her gave her the confidence to open up to me. And over the course of several other dances, private dances that night, she told me her story, and it was truly horrific. And basically one of, ultimately her home country, the country where she had nationality, was the Netherlands, but she'd been trafficked. There's no two ways about it. She was tricked into coming into Tokyo, offered modelling jobs and all the rest of it.
Sure.
As I say in the book, cover can be used for criminal ends as well. So she'd been, somebody had come into. She'd ended up working in the red light district in Amsterdam, as a result of experimentation with drugs. And somebody came along and said, look, I'm a talent scout looking for models, and we're going to fly you to Tokyo, and we're going to do a full shoot, and you're going to be famous.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, actually, all they would intend to do was to traffic her, and she became essentially a sex slave. And I began to understand why she didn't want to tell me the story initially. And my concern was, I've got to do something to help this person. I can't, what do you do? You put yourself in my shoes for the moment. By sort of session number 3 or 4, I was thinking, I have a moral duty to try to help this person. But of course, she had bodyguards in inverted commas.
Well, they're watching her.
They're always watching her.
Do or say anything, yeah.
But right at the end, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, something ridiculous like that. And I saw Maria standing in the vestibule with this man who I took to be her minder. A nasty piece of work. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out every denomination of currency that I had. And, there's some dollars, there's some sterling, there's some yen. And I went over to her and I pressed it into her hand as a tip. And as I did so, I leaned over and I said, will you just tell me your real name? And she did. She whispered her real name back to me, because in that split second, so almost like she didn't have a choice. I could see she was startled by the idea, and obviously concerned that she was going to be overseen. But her bodyguard minder was too busy sort of pretending not to notice the exchange of cash, which she was probably going to extort from her shortly afterwards anyway. And with that, I was able to go to her embassy and say, look, I've got the name of somebody who I understand has been trafficked from your country. This is where she works. This is what her name is. And I think you've really got to try to do something about it, because she's had her passport taken off her. She's got no way of proving it. And the guy said to me, wow, he said, not many people are able to get that sort of information out of somebody like
right.
that. He said, what are you, a social worker?
This is the most productive lap dance I've ever heard of. Yeah. My God, you got a lot done.
And then he said, as I turned to go, he just said, maybe you should be a spy.
Yeah, foreshadowing. Exactly. Wow. That story hits close to home for reasons that I wouldn't necessarily want to share on the show, but it reminds me of one of my other favorite episodes, folks. Daniel Levin. I don't have the episode number handy. Daniel Levin, Levin. It's also about trafficking. He wrote a book about it. It's very interesting. You know the book?
Yes, I haven't read it, but I will make a point of that now, actually.
Oh yeah, you'll love it. Super interesting.
It's one of the most disturbing. I think it's not discussed enough. Let's put it like
trafficking.
That.
Yeah,
trafficking.
I do.
It's so prevalent, and it affects so many countries where we turn a blind eye, and there's all sorts of. Let's not get into the politics of it, but sometimes I think there are certain things which are, so we say, a little bit politically contentious for a cover for nothing much more than sex trafficking and human slavery. And I think we've got to be more honest with ourselves about this.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about that after the show, because I'm curious what you mean. What happened to Maria?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know?
A short answer.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't call you.
There was no way they were going to tell me the upshot of that. I mean, I'd like to think that they were able to make contact with her one way or another. I was in two minds about whether it was worth talking to them, because sometimes you put somebody's life in danger by trying to help them. But so it had to be. I thought initially about just going to the police, and I thought if you're going to put somebody's life in danger, that's probably the way to do it. And I thought if I would talk to the diplomatic service, her country's diplomatic service, they would have a better set of protocols on how to handle it.
Yeah, their high-level police liaison will go to a high-level police officer, not one that's going to run to the Yakuza boss who runs that club and rat her out. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's right that I don't know what happened to her, and I wouldn't have asked them to tell me, because she deserves her privacy still, obviously.
Indeed, yeah. Tell me about this Hungarian border guard. I love the way you handled this one. Yeah.
Amon, yes. So again, actually, I was really young when I did this. This was,
because we're old enough now, we don't have to talk our way through borders anymore, man.
That's true.
That's part of the reason you.
I miss those days.
It was fun. I've only been arrested a couple of times, never in the United States, and it was always for an immigration or border violation. Spent the weekend in a Belarusian prison because I tried to go through on the train, and it turns out you need a transit visa. Little overnight jail stint in Belgrade.
I think every young person needs to go through an experience of a hairy border moment or two.
I agree.
It's a rite of passage.
It is a rite of passage. A little harder these days with the fall of communism. You know, you wouldn't want to do that in North Korea, for
example. And certainly within the European Union, borders are all open anyway.
Right.
But and that would include it up to Hungary, which is where I was travelling to and from. Shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I was part of an initiative from my university, Oxford, to build relationships with the young people who were experiencing capitalism or free markets for the first time. And that included Hungary. And I went to Budapest, but I couldn't afford. No, this was the first time I ever travelled abroad. You know, so having not had a particularly wealthy upbringing, to put it politely, we didn't have overseas holidays. And so the first time I ever managed to go abroad was to go to Hungary on this sort of exchange, if you like. And I had to travel by train because it was too expensive to go by plane.
Sure.
And this was shows how old I am, pre-EasyJet days. And also, Budapest was not exactly a destination to high on the stag do list back then. It was the bachelor party list back then.
Should have been, though.
It should have been. I mean, it's got a lot going for it.
Budapest in the 90s was something else, man. The whole Eastern Bloc in the 90s.
It exploded, didn't it? But I was going there almost immediately after the wall fell, and things were still very fragile. They were still very fractious and febrile. And cut a long story short, as because it was the first time I'd ever been abroad, I didn't realise that you had to sign your passport, so I hadn't signed my passport. And on the way in, when we travelled across the border on the way in, I'd been slightly startled by the border guard coming in to check my passport and sort of opened the door to the compartment where I was sleeping, stark naked, and he was so taken aback by
hanging out.
He neglected to stamp me in.
Yeah, he didn't want to spend any more time with you than absolutely necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, all of this meant that when I was coming back out, and I had very little money with me by the end of this, so a few foreigns really, and sort of £20 in sterling, something like that. When I was coming back out and they came to check our passports, there's this young man who could speak pretty good English, Amon, basically looked at my passport and says, okay, this is irregular. There's no signature and there's no entry stamp. There's a brand new passport, nothing in it. So he put it in his pocket and he said, right, we're going to have to get you off the train and deal with this. Heart sinks, obviously. This was before the days of knowing really how to deal with demands for bribes. I didn't really know what I was expecting, but eventually I got sat down in one of those classic sort of Eastern European rooms, bare walls and a sort of bulb swinging over you, and there's bare bulbs, stank of you,
full ashtray,
that stuff. It was like the full on cliche of an interrogation room, which I suspect is just where they just hung out when they didn't have anything to do between the 3 or 4.
It was the break room before you got there.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was the break room before you got there. The interrogation room.
I'm in the middle of this huge interrogation. Essentially, he just wanted way more money than I had. So just like 2 infractions. I think actually, I never can tell if this is a false memory, but I remember him using the word infraction, which I just think was amazing.
In English?
In English, yeah. I mean, this guy was quite well educated. Yeah. And that's the point. This is why I was able to get out of the situation. But I literally didn't have the money that he was asking for. So you say, whatever it was, $50 for infraction number 1, $50 for infraction number 2. And I'm like, well, I've got like $17 equivalent. And I put it on the table in front of him. And he's like, that's not good enough. And he said, I'm going to have to report this to my superior. And I thought, okay, the train's going to
It's going to get more expensive too, probably.
The train is going to get, absolutely. And then they might actually take me to court. And I might actually have to defend my infractions, minor as they were. But whatever else happened, I was going to miss the train. So I just instinctively grabbed for the thing that connected us, which was a shared language. You know, he was able to speak English. And I just said to him, look, you know, I want you to help me here. I'm stuck. I'm in a horrible position. I'm a young man like you. I've got very little money. You can have it if you want, but just let me get back on that train, because if I'm stuck here, then I don't have anywhere to go. I haven't got a credit card. I've got no way of getting money. I don't know anybody here. I'm throwing myself on your mercy. And, you know, and he's like, I can't help you. I'm not senior enough, basically. And I said, well, I bet that's where you're wrong. I bet you are. You know, look at you. You speak pretty much fluent English. You're well educated. You should be at Oxford University with me, not on a border post like this. You know, of course you've got the influence to do something about this. And suddenly everything changed. And he got up and said, okay, let me see what I can go and sort out with my superior. And he stepped outside for a bit, probably for as long as it took him to get my passport out of his pockets, and then came back and was like, yeah, it's all right. I've sorted this out for you. You're right. I was able to say the right things. I've got this done. And he pushed it over and pushed the money back to me. And that was a really important lesson to me there, that this was somebody who was looking for recognition, really. He was bored. He was probably overeducated for his position. He'd probably been promised the earth with the end of the Cold War, and he was still stuck in some godforsaken border office,
right,
middle of nowhere,
working the night shift,
yeah, getting drunk to get through it, and shaking down poor unsuspecting
backpackers, or whatever,
librarians, or
yeah.
And on this occasion, he met somebody who just, I mean, almost out of desperation, just appealed to his sense of self-importance, because I was like, I'm sure you can help me. I'm sure you've got more influence than you think you've got. And at that point, it was almost like the challenge was, okay, I have to show that that's right, that this person's confidence in me is justified.
I love this. There's so much in the book about validation, earning mind share, getting in the right mindset for a meeting, pro-social behavior, encouraging pro-social behavior. I'm going to talk about some of this stuff in the show close. So yeah, I think a good place, I know we're running out of time. I'll go through a lot of the stuff in the show close, but I think I want to wrap on a couple of specific tactical things.
Yes.
You recommend walking to important meetings. I love this. This is such a good idea. And I find that when I can't do this, I really come in with much more anxiety than if I'm able to walk, even just a block.
Yes. I walked to this afternoon.
Well, that was why you're late. No, well, that in this place is really hard to find.
That's because I got the wrong place.
Yeah,
you know, that's how good a spy I am.
Yes, I was joking about that when we were waiting for you. I was like, and this guy worked for your intelligence service? There's 2 doors. Come on, man.
So, but no, I had walked here. I got off the train at St Pancras, and yeah, it's a 20-minute walk, and you know, the sun's sort of shining as much as it shines in the British summer.
Yeah,
but more important than that, it just gives you that moment to. The way I put it is, for when a spy is going to a meeting, they're conducting anti-surveillance. They're getting rid of the physical followers. They all want to make sure that they're not being followed.
Oh, I see.
It's essentially making sure that they don't carry with them surveillance, so that that team can then identify the person they're meeting. It maybe stretches the analogy a little too far, but I talk about mental anti-surveillance, you know, because we bring with us all of the stresses of the day, all the things that we're worried about, all the baggage, especially with phones in our hands, you know. So I could have come to this discussion with you 2 ways, couldn't I, really? I could have had the concierge come and pick me up, in which case I would probably have been reading emails, which would have been zinging in my mind as I sat down with you. Or I could put my phone away, walk, which we know anyway, I mean, I'm no scientist, but I understand from psychologists, does stimulate our creativity. I always find, when I'm writing fiction or even thing like Spy, if I get stuck, go for a walk, and the answer sort of presents itself. So we all know from experience that walking clears the mind, stimulates creativity. And I say, to me, it's like you're doing a form of mental anti-surveillance. You're getting rid of those demons, the mental, emotional demons that might otherwise mar the first 10 minutes of an interaction. And sometimes that first 10 minutes is really important.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially if you're late and you've got to make up for it.
That's right. Yeah, then you better turn on the charm as soon as you walk in the door. London, I walk pretty much everywhere where that I can. It's a lot harder here than it is in New York, because you got these twisty roads here, right? New York is a grid system. Here, you don't. Thank God for Apple Maps, Google Maps. Otherwise, I would.
Well, the grid system just goes bit awry in the village, doesn't it?
It's
so
that
was slightly
yeah, you can tell it's so old. They were like, "We'll just do this one and it'll wind around this way," and everything's got a weird name. It's not just like Avenue E. It's like Beverly Cross Mews. But there's another one, and that's over there. And when you grow up here, you know that. But if you don't, you're just out of luck.
I think that's just to throw the non-Manhattan.
That's right.
Yeah. Worse, though, I always find in DC, because around the White House, they suddenly just throw the grid off completely. So you think you're sort of walking, you're like, okay, I've now got to just do three more blocks that way. And then suddenly it's just like, oh no, that stops.
That's right.
And resumes again on the other side.
That's right. Yeah, I love the idea of walking to a meeting. I do this before shows too. I'll even go for a walk. If I have a show in my own house, I'll go for a walk around the block before I jump into my show, depending on how hot it is, because I don't want to be sweaty for it. But or I'll go out in my gym and do something really quick. I have to have some sort of mental reset, and sometimes it's a shower and sometimes it's a walk. It depends on the circumstances. But I love that. I never thought about it. I used to think of it as just a ritual, but you're right. It does get rid of a lot of the baggage. I don't have the emails in my head. I'm not just getting off of a call or something like that, right? I've got music in my ears, maybe something like that at the most.
And your circulation's up. So you're feeding your brain literally.
Interesting.
And you're getting fresh air, and you're looking at things anew. But I would add, while on that walk, just also practice a bit of mindfulness. Just be aware of where you are. Take notice of where you are. Just enjoy the fact that you're walking past a particular bar or a particular park, or notice. I try to notice something, even if I'm walking a familiar route. I just try to notice one new thing on that walk each time I go.
I like that. Do spies still use dead drops in meetings now that there are encrypted messaging apps and stuff like that?
Right. This is one of my favorite subjects.
Is it? I've always wondered this, because it's like, why do I need to meet you and then risk getting executed when I can send you a message on the internet?
Well, I talk about human intelligence in the age of artificial intelligence, and it's a really fascinating subject area if you think about it. The challenges of artificial intelligence are, first of all, cover. As I mentioned when talking to you about that anecdote in Congo. They could have checked me out in no time now. So cover becomes much more complicated. Also, technically, as good as we are, our enemies must be expected to be equally good, if not better. So actually, while it feels like you can encrypt something and it's going to be 100% safe, you can never take that for granted. And so in many ways, you need to go back to first principles, what they call Moscow rules. And because I'm not going to, my biggest secrets personally or professionally, I just don't commit to the digital world, because I literally write them down and keep it somewhere where only I know. And so it's in my head or it's on a piece of paper. And states do that as well. So that's why human intelligence recruitment's become much more important, because however good your intercept on of state-to-state communication is, we don't really know what Putin's planning to do. For instance, we don't know what Chinese state plans to do, for example, with regard to Taiwan. We don't, because the really important things they're just not going to broadcast, because they know that intercept is a vulnerability, right? So actually, those human intelligence capabilities, the recruitment of humans who can get to the information you want, becomes much more important. And in fact, those very Stone Age versions of remote communication, dead letter drops, brush contacts, may well be making a renaissance.
Yeah, I never would have thought of that. I suppose that makes complete sense, right? You think, oh, like, what's encrypted on my phone? But somebody's come up with a way to read the screen on a phone through a wall, and we just don't know about it. Or there's a Mossad guy listening to this, nodding right now and going, of course, we put Pegasus on the phone. I want you to send something through your encrypted app because we're reading what's being displayed on the screen using this vulnerability or whatever.
Or you have a meeting in a park and you've got lip readers at work.
Right, yeah.
There's
all kinds of
so many different ways that we don't think about it. It feels like you can engage in secure ways, but as you think it through, you start to realize just how incredibly difficult that is. And some of those age-old techniques are valuable for precisely that reason, because they were developed to be foolproof, and in many ways they still are foolproof.
Yeah. So the best cover is a newspaper with eye holes cut into it, and you're talking behind it, right? So nobody can see. It's
or go back to what we said earlier. The best cover is somebody who's doing the job that they actually do.
Right. So you just go to a meeting with everybody watching to the office of Ford in Indonesia, and you're an auto supplier, and you're talking with somebody else, whatever it is. That way.
It's being hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight, exactly. In the digital age, a lot of people think that they can replace in-person contact and relationships with digital ones. And I really don't believe that to be the case. I think and I'm of course no expert, one of the biggest challenges that intelligence agencies are going to have is a whole generation that comes up thinking that you can befriend someone online, and it's the same thing as having real rapport in person. And that's going to be a big challenge for trust building and things like that, I think, in the future.
It's not just the intelligence agencies. I think it's a challenge for every employer everywhere, that young people today don't understand the value of building personal relationships. Or I say that, but on one or two occasions I've been very, very, very favourably impressed when I've spoken at universities or schools recently. Actually, there seems to be a bit of a move, a bit of a backlash, and I would say now, Jordan, that if I go and talk to a group of middle-aged executives, they're more likely to be the ones playing on their phones and checking their emails than if I'm talking to a group of 16 and 17-year-olds.
Yeah, because they know that it's dangerous. Us middle-aged guys are the ones we think we've got it under control.
It seems that way. Yeah. So I think there's some hope. I never want to write off the young. It's so easy to say, isn't it? Oh, this younger generation.
Well, that's what old folks do. That's what old fogies like us do, man. We complain about the next generation and how we had it harder. Yeah. No,
I think let's avoid the temptation, because actually my recent engagement with, I'm giving a talk on Tuesday at the LSE for a social mobility summit.
London School of Economics.
So I've dealt with the London School of Economics before, and I have to say all the students I met there and engaged with have been actually phenomenally good at the interpersonal side of things. So I'm not going to write them off. I don't think there's any generational write-off going on.
That's phenomenal. That's great news. Even if those skills may be becoming more rare, I have no data for that. I would love to see a backlash against the technological stuff that my generation fell into.
I think it's there.
Yeah.
I really do.
Excellent. I like that. Julian Fisher, thank you so much for coming into, well, not my studio, but Tile Yard Studios here in London to do this.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Jordan.
Likewise,
thanks so much for inviting me along.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes, where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.